Today I want to talk about 7 features I prefer in Premiere Pro over Davinci Resolve, and then I want to talk about 7 features I prefer in Davinci Resolve over Premiere Pro. Now this video might be helpful to you if you're deciding what system to use or if you're considering switching editing programs. As a disclaimer, I still use both programs. I use them for different reasons. For example, I use Premiere Pro for a lot of client work because it's considered kind of an industry standard. So if I need to send off a project file, that's much easier to do than if I'm editing in Resolve. But if I had a choice to edit in just one program, it would be Davinci Resolve at this point. I started integrating Resolve into my workflow about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years ago, and it was a kind of a difficult switch at first after spending thousands and thousands of hours in Premiere, but at the end of the day, I'm very glad I made the switch. So let's get into it. First, I want to talk about the 7 features I prefer in Premiere Pro over Davinci Resolve. Number 1 is the Frame.io integration. Now, Adobe actually just bought Frame.io, but up until that point, they've been a leader in the industry, kind of revolutionizing production over the last few years with their review tools, and now they have the camera to cloud tool, which I think is going to come very much in handy, especially for remote production or virtual production, as we see more and more of a rise of those over time. Now, Frame.io also integrates into Resolve and Final Cut, but with your Adobe subscription, you get access to a limited version of Frame.io that's actually pretty robust, instead of needing to pay extra for a service like you would through Resolve or Final Cut. Number 2 are the transcribe and caption tools. It's actually the auto transcribe function. They just added it this year into Premiere Pro. It's incredible. So I recently had a client project where I had about 15 interviews that I needed to transcribe. And what I would have had to do in the past was send that off to a transcription service. They would have taken a day or two to process that, and they would have sent it back with the finished transcripts. Premiere Pro can now just do that with a click. And so I ended up just needing to go through and double check. It was like 99.95% accurate. The only things it struggled with were weird names or if people were mumbling. So for example, for this video, I bet it would be 100% perfect. Now the really cool thing is I can export that and turn it into a PDF if I want to, or Premiere can actually turn it into a caption that lines up perfectly with your video. The next thing I prefer about Premiere Pro over Davinci Resolve is that it's considered industry standard in most cases. Now, I know that some Hollywood movies edit on Avid still, and that's fine, but for the rest of us, it's industry standard for client work. So if I need to send off a project to someone else, I know I can send them a Premiere file, and they will very likely be able to use it. And that's not the case yet with Davinci Resolve, and certainly not the case with Final Cut. The next thing that could be a pro for some people is that Premiere Pro functions and runs pretty well on a computer that isn't super beefy or doesn't have a ton of specs. Now that says nothing about your workflow process, the hard drives you're using, or the footage you're using, but in general, it can run on less beefy software than Davinci Resolve. The next thing I prefer about Premiere Pro is the preset and template and tutorial availability. Now this is becoming much less of a thing than it was 1.5 years or 2 years ago when I switched over to Resolve. But initially it was very hard to find presets or templates or tutorials on Davinci Resolve related things that were as accessible and easy to understand or use as the ones for Premiere Pro. The next thing I really prefer about Premiere Pro is a tool that they actually added this year, and they brought it over from Audition, is the remix tool. I love this tool for dialing in the length of the song that I want to use. It's so simple, so easy, and it's a lot easier for me than having to go in and match beats, especially if you're not necessarily a musical person. It just saves time. It's a really, really nice workflow tool, and yeah, I like it a lot. The final thing I prefer about Premiere Pro over Resolve is being able to use just a keyboard shortcut to fill your screen with whatever section of the panel you have selected. I miss that a lot in Davinci Resolve, being able to full screen my timeline if I need to make a bunch of moves or some specific adjustments once my timeline gets over a few layers high. Okay, now I want to talk about the things that I prefer about Davinci Resolve instead of Premiere Pro. Number 1 is the price. So you can do most of what you need to do with the free version of Davinci Resolve. Free. Compared to Adobe Premiere Pro, which if you get the app by itself, I think it's $20-something a month just for the app. And then if you want the whole Creative Cloud with all the other apps that kind of go around it, it's like $50-something a month. Now, this is kind of crazy to me when you think about, oh, even over a year, you're saving like thousands of dollars. And the thing is, if you want the fully featured version of Resolve, you just buy it for $300 and you pay for it once, and that's it. The second thing I prefer about Resolve is that, well, we've seen the memes, it tends to be more reliable in general for most people. That's not always true, but generally that seems to be the case, that Resolve is just a more stable program than Premiere Pro is in general. The next thing I prefer about Davinci Resolve is that it's an all-in-one package, so it includes your editing program, a world-class color grading suite, the equivalent of Audition, they call it Fairlight for audio, they've got Fusion, which is an After Effects equivalent, and then they've got their export section, which is very equivalent to Media Encoder. So you're getting the equivalent of like 5 apps all in one package, which is just amazing. I mentioned in the last section, but the next thing I prefer about Resolve is the color workflow in every single way. It's literally the industry standard for color, and the idea that you can just work in one program without having to flip over and export XMLs out and then make sure those are working and come on through. It's just amazing. A few cool things: auto color management. It'll read the metadata of your camera and just give you a correct color that you set up right away with auto color management. That's super cool. You can create LUTs out of Resolve. So for example, if you need to just create a quick look and drop it into Premiere, you just bring in a still, grade it really quick, export your LUT, and drop it into Premiere, and it'll work exactly the same as you think it should. No weird oversaturation or anything crazy like that. The next thing is the trackers are incredible. They're so good for tracking a face or a particular part of the frame. This is something I wish Adobe had, but they don't. So that's one of the things that's just game changing. If you shoot on a Blackmagic camera, obviously Davinci Resolve is going to be a better option. The workflow is just seamless. It works super well. You can use all the RAW functions. It's not gonna glitch. No, Premiere Pro has gotten more stable with it over time, but it's Blackmagic's program, so it's just buttery smooth when you're using Blackmagic RAW. The next thing I want to talk about is the built-in noise reduction. It's amazing. Even if your footage is very noisy, it can do a very serviceable job. I've used denoiser from Red Giant. I've used Neat Video. I've even used the one in After Effects, and hands down, the one in Resolve is the easiest to use, and you get the best outcome at the end of the day. So there it is, 7 things that I prefer about Premiere Pro and 7 things that I prefer about Davinci Resolve. Did I miss one of your favorite features of the program? Well, let me know about that down in the comments. I hope this video was helpful to you, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello, and welcome to my basement. That's creepy. That was not what I intended it to be. Today we are talking about 7